Good morning, everyone that's just been admitted into the room. If you haven't already noticed, everyone that's just been admitted will be on mute. So if you would like to speak, just be mindful that you're on mute before you start talking. Otherwise, I'll just see an open mouth and no noise. I will just give it a couple more minutes for any stragglers to join the conversation, and then we'll get going. Well, funnily enough, just waiting for John Morgan. Oh, here he is. Fashionably late. Welcome, John. John, you're on mute, by the way.
Hi, sorry about that. Morning, everyone.
Right, so anyway, let's get going. So thank you all for joining us again for our Rethink discussion this week or this month on food and the future of food retailing, and I guess a debate, a discussion on how we all feel that food will, I guess, be part of the real estate landscape over the next 5 to 10 years. Ourselves at Leonard Design are incredibly excited about the prospects. I think, as we have all seen, particularly from, I guess, on some sides, supermarkets from the food sector have been doing incredibly well during the pandemic. Obviously, there have been those that aren't from an F&B retailer standpoint, but also, I guess we will get into a discussion of how they can bounce back. I think they will be able to bounce back if they do it in the right way. But if we start the conversation on the side of the success of supermarkets and I guess the prospects of what they may face, I think personally from our point of view, they're in an incredibly strong position to build on the successes and I guess the boost in sales that they've seen during the pandemic. I think we're all very aware that this pandemic and the number of lockdowns we're going to have isn't going away anytime soon. I think we're going to be in this situation in some sort of guise over the next 12 months. So there's at least an opportunity there. And then I guess linking to a historic conversation that we've had, the last conversation we had was on last mile logistics. I think there's a strong correlation or a strong link there between the supermarkets that we are now seeing boosting their revenues there. I guess from the facts, if you guys have read the short blog post that we wrote, their like-for-like sales are up 3%, which is pretty good. But if you look at their online sales, they're up 72%. And we feel that this is going to be a huge opportunity for these retailers to grow into that market and use the existing real estate they have as a distribution network rather than a classic store. So John, I'll go to you first to open up the conversation.
Yeah, I guess it's just we've been having a number of conversations with a number of clients, just looking at the kind of success in food and food retailing currently, and to look at where that then converts into an opportunity. I think definitely last year there was a lot of kind of focus on kind of retail parks and there's big areas of land that are available, and that being a massive challenge to traditional high streets. And it's understanding how the property industry can kind of leverage that opportunity in terms of food retailing. Obviously, the reality is a lot of these supermarkets are big, simple, blank fronted boxes with one set of double doors in, often in great locations with great transport infrastructure. and how do we move those over to be something that is kind of more destinational, more experience, all the things we've been talking about in these sessions as well. And then how that can then inform what else goes into those sites as well. You know, there's many schemes we've looked at where people have talked about building blocks of flats on car parks next to supermarkets, and that doesn't actually make a desirable place to live. It makes the Excel spreadsheet look great because you take away some car parking space that has very low value, and you get planning consent to build some residential on there. But it doesn't feel that the industry has got to the right answer or the cleverness yet for it. And I think, you know, linked with that as well, so I can see, you know, Hamish and David are on the call today, you know, looking at then how the supermarkets are getting supplied, whether that is the last mile logistics we've seen in the last time, or it is about kind of partnering with supermarkets to actually grow their own produce as well, and not in a kind of token gesture, we've got a couple of allotments on the roof and we can grow 6 lettuces and kind of tick an eco box and say we're doing it, but actually do it where it becomes a commercially viable, sustainable piece of the business as well on there. And I think, you know, the opportunity is there's something that is successful. You know, the general public, you know, the nation are spending money on food. Okay, they've got one offer at the moment that is buy online or buy in a supermarket online. Sorry, buy online, buy online for supermarket, or buy physically for supermarket. And actually, it feels like there should be much more of an opportunity out there within the market for us to kind of leverage that as an opportunity.
John, I think
Hamish, sorry, go on.
I think there's also, and I think you go when you mentioned Hamish's name, there's going to be an interesting opportunity to leverage the green agenda as well. I think that's something that's really, really important now in the development world, particularly with getting planning agreed.
You know, pre-COVID, people were out protesting on the streets about the environment and everything. And granted, that seems to have kind of quietened down in terms of news and press and events happening. But, you know, post-COVID, that issue is still going to be there. And reality is whether those people are your employees or your graduates, you know, it's going to be something that matters to them and matters to the property industry. And the property industry, I think, needs to kind of wake up, focus on it, and address it as well. I think, Hamish, maybe I'll bring you in then, just, I guess, you know, talking about, you know, kind of, you know, the opportunity of kind of, you know, the ability to do urban farming, vertical farming, you know, not having, you know, I know when we've been working with you, this whole idea of, you know, 4 jumbo jets of watercress being flown from Spain every week into the UK, you know, feels so incredibly wrong when we've got loads of space to build vertical farms and create a financially viable model, and that we can literally walk out the back of the supermarket and get the salad greens there, and that can work, you know. And for some reason, every time we look at a project with you, it feels like a no-brainer, and it's mad why people aren't doing it, but they aren't yet. And do you have a reason on why you think they're not yet?
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of key points behind it. So I think firstly, over the last probably 5 to 7 years, there's been an evolution in the underlying technology. So the lighting systems are becoming more efficient, and you know, the power requirements for running a vertical farm up until now have kind of undermined the economics of it. I think secondly, there's a growing appreciation of the true economic cost of cheap food, and consumers are becoming a little bit more aware of that. And there's a slow trend towards buying better and being prepared to pay a premium, and that's helping in terms of the economic model. I think that the third thing the third thing that's kind of really driving it is that everyone's come to the recognition that there is no silver bullet to this, and it's going to take a portfolio of different technologies to really solve the problem. So it's not going to be a case of building, you know, hundreds of massive vertical farms to supply all of the fresh produce. It's going to be a case of, you know, point solutions for point problems, and building a portfolio. So it's about using the technology as its best place to be able to, you to fit within, the available infrastructure, within the plans that developers have got, and to fit within the product portfolio that the retailers have got. So it's not a case of looking at this as being a swap out of what they're already doing. It's about being able to add some new product into their portfolio and be able to address a sort of this groundswell of consumer demand for more sustainable, lower carbon impact, all of that sort of thing. Yeah, but I think the biggest driver behind this has been the technology development, and we'll see where that goes in the next couple of years. But I think we're now at an inflection point where it does actually begin to make economic sense.
Definitely, and for me, that is a property solution that's needed. It's the accommodation, the space, the buildings, the right location, the logistics, all of that. In the same way as the last mile logistics, it's a property solution, and it's the property industry that sort of is in control of either ignoring it and leaving it in the too hard pile, or getting this thing to work and finding a solution with it. And I think that's where we're wrestling with the fact of why the property industry isn't kind of embracing that opportunity, when actually opportunity to make money is kind of what people in the property industry for.
I think we're at a good stage. It's not really a very good stage, because we're losing retailers, and therefore lots and lots of big spaces are now empty. But I guess that provides us with an amazing opportunity to start retrofitting those spaces, or backfilling those spaces with something that's actually useful and valuable to our lives, rather than just pandering to consumerism.
Definitely. I think Stuart Harris, I'll maybe try and bring you in a sec. I think it's also the fact that the reality is the nation is spending money on food. We're all buying food every week. You can see, and as you say, in the supermarket numbers, in the online kind of market. And actually, if there was an offer that was accessible to people, and they had a different choice in a property solution, I can see that people would actually make that choice. And therefore, it's about working out what the solution is for that. And if I think Stuart from Milligan, when Milligan ran Camden Market, or where you kind of see successful markets, actually their success is growing very, very much so. Or the creative trade model for Milligan, it's all about community and relevance, and many, many more things than just a distribution network. And therefore, if we've got these sites in great locations, we've just got to change the offer so it responds to what people actually want to do, rather than them only having one option. What's your view on that, Stuart?
I think it's probably a couple of comments, John. I think key for us, and I'm sure for many others, has always been understanding the place in which you're developing. And place can mean a number of different things. So it can mean the actual physical property that sits on the land, but looking in detail about the people who use the area, where they're coming from, the other facilities that are nearby. But whatever we do and whatever we create, we're looking at building it around the people in the community where we are, but attracting other people, having a unique proposition. But it's a combination of other uses as well. So I think you started off this conversation by saying, it's not about taking a retail park or a supermarket and just putting residential on it. Placemaking has been often overused over the last sort of 10 years, but it is still incredibly relevant in terms of getting that bit right, and that environmental element to it correct. And I think it's interesting hearing what Hamish had to say, and I think that is an incredibly important part. And I think we have a real opportunity now as a property industry to really take that part seriously as part of our, rather than, it appears on many occasions to have been a box ticking exercise in the past, but it's really accretive to what we do, the environment and the actual property that we're developing.
Definitely. And I think it's that relevance that seems to be really important. And in some ways, I can see that when you do a feasibility and it's an Excel spreadsheet and you basically just, put in a supermarket rent versus a cheap build cost, it kind of works. Whereas something like the creative trade model, which there's more risk in theory attached to the income because it's lots of small businesses and it's lots of small amounts of rent coming together. Therefore, it makes the Excel spreadsheet more difficult to get the fund or the board to sign off on than a kind of lease. But now a 15-year lease, when someone can give you a CVA in 2 weeks' time, surely has less value nowadays in it. And therefore, does that comparatively increase the value of the kind of more relevant local offer?
I think, John, it's interesting when you look back at why shopping centres were attractive in the past as an investment proposition. And it was because you had your risk was mitigated across 20, 30, 40, 50 operators. And that's the sort of a similar approach to creative trade. The difference that we've had is that we've had this old lease structure model, which has not allowed any flexibility. And then because the valuation model has been driven a certain way, that's created even more inflexibility in terms of changing the quality of the mix, changing the dynamic within the offer that you're created. There hasn't been a fair structure. There hasn't been a transparent structure. So, some of those original principles, if we take those and then we look at other learnings, whether it be from markets, whether it be from factory outlets, and we try and come up with the right model where everybody can see that everybody genuinely benefits from success, whether it's the landlord, developer, or the tenant.
And that is true, actually. The factory outlet model does work on that, doesn't it? It's a turnover, it's sales per square foot, and if you're not making the kind of turnover, you can kind of be moved around your lease as well. You are true, actually. And I think also, in some ways, the property industry was very comfortable with that kind of shopping centre, supermarket model, as you say, because especially shopping centre, because you're spreading your risk. And reality is, if you look then into the residential market, where it always used to be about kind of building flats to sell, because you didn't want to have a rental property, because in theory, everyone was on short-term leases, they could all move out in 6 months. But somehow the investment model has got comfortable with PRS and build to rent. And they're just saying, great, we'll assume it can be run at 80% occupancy. We assume that we've got a good management team are running it. And therefore, even though that income in a big rental residential scheme is unsecured, they are willing to kind of fund it. And why isn't that translating into the kind of retail world?
John, I think that's one of the points you just made is really interesting, is if we, I guess, drill down how we are financing or how we eventually get sign off to build any of these buildings, it's on the perception that it's going to make profit for the final person who's lending it. So essentially, let's call it the bank. Now that there is you almost need a proof of that model to get more and more people bought in, and we're seeing that growth in the sector now as almost self-perpetuating that stopping that hesitancy to invest in something that may look unsustainable or risky, because at the end of the day, someone's got to justify their job by investing in that property, and it's got to make money. Otherwise, they keep doing that, they're going to lose it. Now that the food sector is growing and we've got proof in the pudding, more people are going to be interested in it. I guess also more people are now willing to invest in projects that have a not necessarily a green agenda, but an agenda that's benefiting society and the planet. And we can also leverage that on a lot of these kind of schemes as well.
Definitely. Maybe Simon Harvey from Derby City Council. I don't know which area of the city council you work in, but I guess, for local authorities, it must be a huge challenge and a kind of balancing act for you in terms of, city centres and being a city council.
Yeah, I mean, my role at the council is in public health. It might be useful to explain where I'm coming from in terms of local food retail. So I've been working following the COVID-19 pandemic has created not just a health crisis, but a bit of a food crisis. One of the things that's been quite interesting in Derby is the fact that I suppose, however retailers in Derby, local retailers feel about the local food economy, actually the fact that there is quite a strong local food infrastructure has meant that we haven't been perhaps victims of some of the weaknesses where people have depended on the government sort of airlifting in food supplies from the big boys. One of the things we found was that actually we were able to pull together a network which included a mixture of voluntary organisations linked to local food businesses and local food growers, which meant that we were able to pretty much hit the ground running, meeting the needs of people who were suddenly faced with requiring emergency food supplies, and to get a much better offer to those people than the kind of tins of peaches and Angel Delight that was coming from Brake Brothers and being dropped off whether you wanted it or not. But going forward, I suppose we would be interested, just from the public health point of view, we would be interested in seeing a strengthening of local food retail. One of the concerns that I suppose had come out across Europe with COVID was that it highlighted some of the pressures on the system. Some of that is people depending on very long supply chains, and countries who depended on very long supply chains and importing suddenly found that they were faced with food shortages that they hadn't expected. There was also one of the things that's happened as people have not gone out to eat as much is that there's a sort of a surge in home cooking, but what people are buying, and what I suppose again, which is a public health concern, is to go for the sort of ultra processed, long life food, which the supermarkets can do in abundance. But really, that is not, on a sort of population level, that is not going to, we're going to reap the long term consequences of that. But actually, on the positive side, areas with shorter supply chains where retailers are linked to their to local agriculture, and where you've got a strong local offer, have been in a better position. And I think the test of that for Derby came when the government sent a task force round, basically to come and advise local authorities, like this is what you need to do to deal with the food crisis. Got to Derby and went, all right, okay, it's been sorted and moved on. So we're working with Community Action Derby, which is the sort of umbrella organisation for voluntary organisations across the city, on a project called Food for Thought Alliance, basically to sort of think longer term with that and develop relationships with local retailers and to examine the local food supply chain. Mindful that when COVID goes away, most of the problems that are associated with the food chain will still exist because they existed before COVID, and it's thinking creatively. So like you've discussed, the role of markets and street vendors, and how those play a role in getting people to even think about running a food business. I know people like NCAS, the National Catering and Association, had done work about using street vendors as a way of getting sort of young entrepreneurs trained up to think about doing sort of more innovative stuff. Those traders are more likely to use local food chains rather than the big national and international ones, and they will be the food retailers of the future. And in terms of local agriculture, and we're talking about local food growing, again, there is actually Derby is well resourced in terms of growing land. And one of the things I would say is, if you feel that is something of value, then I would also shout up about that, because it would be very tempting to think, oh, we could just sell off that land and build houses on it. But actually, there's quite a lot of local sort of innovation around allotments and different ways of doing stuff, and that might be worth a conversation as well. Anyway, that's my perspective.
Good. That's good, and I think the work we're doing, Derby City Council, actually is very forward thinking in terms of their approach on many fronts as well. And I think that whole thing, I think one of the things we've discussed is one of the challenges of running a food business obviously is when that food goes out of date, you know, how much stock do you have to kind of have abundance and have the experience, but then how much stock you carrying, and having an outlet then for that stock to go to as well is incredibly important as a kind of back of house kind of supply chain as well, in helping those entrepreneurs run that business. So for us, again, it's about putting those two things together, or we've had the ability to see those two things kind of start to come together as well.
One question then, just to pick up on, because again, this is a lot of talk. I mean, Derby's a city, so the city centre looms large in conversations about retail. But I'm guessing as people are working from home, they're presumably shopping more in their local neighbourhoods. Is there sort of any sort of avenue in looking at perhaps development of retail in neighbourhoods where people are no longer sort of rushing to the city centre to go and do all their shopping?
Yeah, it's been interesting. I don't think anyone from the co-op is on, are they? Some of them had accepted to come, but you know, in the conversation we've been having with the co-op is, you know, with them being based more in, you know, smaller centres, and that, you know, they have seen, you know, this kind of growth in the basket shop, definitely, which they were seeing pre-COVID, where people weren't wanting to do a large weekly shop as well. So I think those businesses, but then, you know, we're seeing, you know, supermarkets, bigger supermarkets taking out some of the initiatives. You know, Jake, you were saying, weren't you, about those certain supermarkets who are taking out some of their kind of market street type initiatives from those big supermarkets, because they see that being done locally in those kind of local stores as well.
Yeah, I think we are seeing, and I think everyone would agree, that we're seeing almost a turn back in time in terms of the way that we retail or the way that we consume. So we're looking at bringing people back into towns and city centres. We're looking at local produce and local retailers and an authenticity that we probably lost over the last 20 years, 30 years by homogenising the town centre. And I think food is an incredibly important part of that. So you will see a rise in the local butcher or the local greengrocer, I think, and also using those retailers now utilising technology. So for example, I get a vegetable delivery every Thursday from a local greengrocer, but he uses an online portal for me to either have a recurring order, or I can change it every week. And that means that I don't have to go to the local high street, but I can still buy local. I think there's both. I know that sounds bad on the local high street, I'm not going there, but I do think that in previous conversations we've had, that people like the interaction that we're now getting, because we're not really allowed to go out or interact with friends and family. Going to a local shop at the moment is a great way to go and speak to a human rather than a computer screen.
And I think, you know, we're seeing that, you know, massive growth in like things as Shop Appy and Street Dots and all those kind of platforms, which is really interesting, that, you know, retailers aren't looking for kind of physical platforms, but online platforms as well. I see John Percy's on, if I can kind of bring you in a minute, maybe just in terms of Montague Evans' view, in terms of what you're seeing this kind of impact is in terms of kind of planning and town centre and city centre strategy. Because I think, you know, we started looking at things where, you know, people are looking to food to be the answer. And obviously we went through a kind of wave of, you know, food being the answer in terms of all these kind of restaurants opening, you know, and there was this boom, and then it kind of went bust. But people are still seen to be searching for food to be the answer, as opposed to retail. So as an agency, Conceptional, who we work with, who do the kind of business planning behind our design work, and, you know, it seems to be, you know, starting to come to the forefront more and more. And I think when we're seeing local authorities going in and purchasing big chunks of their town or city centre as well, that local relevance is becoming more and more important as well. Are you on, John? And you're on mute if you are. I was going to bring you in. Maybe not.
I think a great... Oh, sorry, John.
Playing with my settings just to make sure I was still on. Yes, some really interesting sort of themes and topics reviewed this morning. And I guess from a town centre perspective, it's all part of that evolution of a town and what it kind of offers. And part of that has been driven by the recent lockdown and people's sort of looking or requirement for a local offer which goes alongside it, and partly some sort of longer term trends. I think, you know, when you say sort of food is the issue, I mean, there was certainly a restaurant boom that came forward, and that was driven predominantly by sort of, I think, a private equity model, which saw the acquisition of various restaurant brands, and then for those brands to go on quite an aggressive expansion, and for the investors then to sort of exit once they'd grown it up to a significant scale. Now, you know, that kind of model is always quite high risk, and it kind of ran out of steam in the same way that perhaps some of the same private equity models for retail expansion also ran out of steam. And in certain locations, then restaurants are still performing well, and we've seen some evidence of some of the quick service restaurants in particular doing well over this lockdown period, because they've been able to continue to trade and operate, whereas again some of the brands that relied on a table service have suffered a lot more. And then from a sort of supermarket perspective, there are a whole raft of sort of challenges and changes which are also coming into that sector as well. You sort of touched on online deliveries, and I think the growth of an online delivery will still be coming forward. I think everyone's remember seeing the headlines about sort of delivery slots being a bit like gold dust during that period, and that was probably one of the only constraints actually to the continued growth of that particular sector. But and then looking at sort of sustainability of the food offer, and whether it's appropriate that we can continue to get so much food from abroad, and how that's all coming forward, sort of tying that in with an issue about pricing. And from the audience probably that's on this call, pricing may be less critical than the sort of sustainability issues that sit around the food, but for a lot of the population, then price will be the most critical thing. And you know, that probably points towards a centralized or a supermarket type model versus something a bit more independent. And you know, I guess marrying those things together in a way which encourages people to visit towns and everything else is going to be the next challenge for everybody, really. So quite a few topics there, but you know, it's very interesting stuff at the moment. But most of the food retailers, from an agency perspective, are still on the expansion trail, I would say, and are looking at different models and different types of things. And I think one of the more interesting things that's coming from the food operators will be how they might integrate stuff like the urban farming and other elements, and how that integrates with their design and with their overall offer that sits in there. So that's probably enough for me.
That's good. And I think, John, you know, you talk about the kind of restaurants that boom and bust. I think obviously that, you know, there's then been this boom of kind of food halls, you know, and, you know, that have been kind of coming everywhere. And there's this whole debate about, are they going to be the next kind of boom bust? You know, everyone's been saying, can we have an Altrincham food market? Can we have a box park? You know, can we have, you know, a food hall? And actually, I think our perception is the food halls have the flexibility to keep changing the offer, to keep changing the food offer. So, you know, if gin's in, you have a gin bar in there, which makes it relevant for local people. You can change its local market. You know, if everyone's into sushi, you have sushi. When everyone's suddenly bothered about, you know, fishing and killing tuna, you know, you kind of get rid of the sushi guy and you bring in pulled pork. You know, they have the ability to change. You know, do you think that those food halls have the opportunity, you know, to actually to change and adapt and to sustain and not have the kind of boom bust that the restaurants had?
Well, yes, some of the food halls, I think, do have very much that opportunity to adapt and change. It's no doubt that they have been extremely popular, and that that changing nature of those has worked well. And from an operator perspective, then having lower sort of fit out costs and so on of going into a small kiosk within a food hall, less a barrier to entry than some of the more traditional restaurants and sat with it. I guess the converse is up to that some of the food halls have really struggled during this lockdown period, and their business model has suffered in that sense. So in normal market conditions, you'd say, yeah, they've got a good ability to kind of change and do everything else, but it shows they're as susceptible to damage as almost any other operator if there's some major structural shift that sits out there.
Definitely. Thank David Walker. I can see, so you're on the call. If you wanted to come in.
Hi. Yeah. Thanks. I think one of the things that it's important to just think about is more about the post-COVID world rather than where we're at now. And for some of that, we have to, I think you characterized at the beginning, you were talking about, we have supermarkets, but we also have a big boom in the online sort of market as well. And then we've discussed also about people shopping local, and that has become a very big part of what's happened in COVID, and hopefully that will be something that keeps going as well. There are 2 or 3 other things that I'd just like to drop into the conversation. One is the announcement that from 2030, we won't be able to buy any more petrol or diesel cars, so there'll be a lot more electric cars around. And that the other is that there will be a big boom in the government pushing for new housing. So that will create new locations or hubs for population, and obviously population need food. So we have to match those increased locations, increased populations with the food offers that are out there. So I think one of the things we've also seen is the rise in not just local produce, but also farmers markets and things like that. And I think in a post-COVID world, we probably will want to saviour the shopping experience, not the shopping as in, we've done it before in the experience of shopping for clothes and things like that, but now about food shopping is becoming, or may become, more of a leisure activity and something that we actually enjoy more, rather than rushing to the shop, grabbing some things and then rushing home to use them. And I think retailers will maybe hopefully not miss a trick here, where they want to capture their audience more. So let's just throw something out there, for example, where you might have a big supermarket at the moment, and you go in there and it's aisles and aisles and aisles of stuff, and there is a place for that. But also, what about if we turned it on its head and said, okay, let's just turn it into a marketplace? And the marketplace, the bazaar, these are places where people really want to go and spend a bit more time. And, you can cater for a lot of things. And as you were saying before, it can be something that people can plug into and plug out of. And, expanding that model into, what we were talking about, I think Simon from the council there, street vendors and things. These are quite vibrant things that are happening. And I think a model where we start to look at how these different elements might work in different locations, and blending some of these things together, rather than just having one bland offering of, you're going to a retail park and you're going to see aisles and aisles of food, and then you're going to get back in your car and drive home. I think we've got to look at this in a much more nuanced way about how food and the public interact, and how that actually happens from post-COVID. I hate to throw this in, but COVID has been really, really important. But in the grand scheme of things, when we look back, say in 10 years from now, it will have been something that's a catalyst for other things. I think the climate change agenda and the change in society because of that is something that's going to really affect what we're doing over the next 5-10 years, and really affect how property needs to respond to that as well.
Good. And I think actually the point you just made, which is really interesting, is the whole thing about stopping making petrol cars and everything. And there are so many supermarkets that have moved into petrol station forecourts. They've become little Waitrose, little Sainsbury's. You know, I guess we haven't even thought about what is the impact on that. Is it the fact that the petrol station forecourt goes and the supermarket expands and takes all that land and becomes bigger? Is it the fact that those supermarkets all shut and they become something totally different? Yeah, that's true. Maybe that's another one. The effect of petrol station forecourts, you know, and that's a lot of land in very, very key locations.
David, I think your comment about supermarkets becoming more of a bazaar or a market is a really interesting one. And also, I think we had this conversation in a previous discussion with Sheffield City Council. So they built a beautiful market hall, but unfortunately, the vendors in it were taken from a historic market in another part of town, weren't curated very well, weren't kind of marketed in the right way for the right demographic, and it just substituted an old failing market for another old failing market just in a beautiful building. And it's that curation, it's that effort from a leasing point of view that would make that centre really successful and create probably a beautiful anchor in that part of town. And I think that is something that we could be and should be looking for, to give us that authenticity of retailing and consumption, and also working with local vendors and creating an anchor for a town to bring people into a town centre. I think that's a really exciting prospect.
And just to that point, and really interesting comments, David. So I met with somebody last year who was looking at a new approach for big box retail and for supermarkets, with the increasing automation of checkouts and and things like the Amazon Go model, retasking the staff to become product advocates and product experts, and to enrich the shopping experience by being able to talk people through what the best choices are, and drive kind of like value add in the shopping experience for supermarkets, which is a really, really novel idea. And secondly, just in terms of the automotive side of it, and I think yes, the switch to electric, and moving away from from internal combustion engines is going to drive significant change. But the other thing that we can't miss out on in all of this is there's going to be a change in the ownership model for vehicles as well. As autonomous vehicles, which will become commonplace in our lifetime, as they start coming on stream, that's going to dramatically drive down requirements for parking spaces, for the vehicle-centric infrastructure that we have in cities. And what is it we can do to start repurposing some of those spaces into nature reserves, urban gardens, and that kind of thing. So there's a whole nother dynamic around that. Just off on one now.
Sure. And I see Katie has been quite active in the kind of chat. So I'll bring you and Katie. Just, you made comments, I think, in terms of Shop Happy as a kind of platform for kind of local businesses and retailers. I mean, do you want to kind of just make some comments for the group?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm from Marketing Derby, so we're the inward investment agency for Derby and Derbyshire. So obviously our focus is to try and support our local businesses and bring business into the area, as you probably well know. So I guess just listening to everything you're saying today about changing, I guess the uses of venues is something we obviously speak about quite frequently, and trying to be a bit clever in what people are going to bring into the area, rather than just the same old, looking at what the new thing might be. And this morning was the Chesterfield Investment Summit. There's a Midlands UK Forum for Growth happening at the moment, and the conversation everywhere is things need to change. City centres and high streets aren't what they used to be, and I think it's just quite interesting listening to everything you've been saying today. It's very much all on the same lines as what everyone else has been saying. And so using these clever apps like Shopappy, looking at people like Bustler Market who are already kind of giving us what we want, which is that communal food market kind of street vendor, you know, for us to visit on a weekly basis. I know they started going weekly just before the second lockdown kicked in. So I guess, and I've spoken to Simon quite a few times as well, and it's just looking at exactly like you said before, bringing what people want to an area. So creating a location for people to spend the whole day in, rather than coming to Derby just to do a bit of shopping and then scooting away again, having paid £5 parking. You know, turn Derby into a hub so people can come for the day, they can eat there, they can shop there, they can meet friends there, they can go to the theatre, they can go. And I just think it's really interesting. Everyone seems to have the same thinking. So it's just, I guess, a way of making it happen.
Katie, it's really interesting that you said that, and a perfect segue for us at Leonard Design. We have, particularly in continental Europe, been looking at a model of branding existing shopping centres in a way that turns them into a destination. And we've been looking at the use of food to do this. So on a typical 2-story shopping centre, you would have different levels of food offer, and they would slow down, or the amount of time that you would spend there would extend, the further up the building you got. So you would have a roof deck with a bar and an evening economy or an experiential economy. You have the level below would be the first floor of the building, would be higher quality, more exclusive dining. And then you'd have your ground floor, which would be the quick food hall or fast food chains. And we're seeing that as being quite an attractive offer now, and creating, like you say, a destination where historically you might say, oh, I'm going to go to John Lewis or House of Fraser as the anchor of a shopping centre. You're now saying, oh, I'm going to go to whatever that shopping centre might be called. I'm going to Meadowhall, I'm going to Into Derby as the destination. I plan on spending my entire day there. I've got 3 different meals. I might have my lunch in the food hall. I might have my breakfast in the fast food, and then I'll go for dinner in the evening with friends at a nice restaurant, and then I'll go for a drink at the end of the night. And it's creating a far longer experience, a far longer shopping, I guess, consuming time for those consumers, and therefore the retailers are seeing that success.
Absolutely.
We've got our first pitch for a fund to see if someone actually next week to actually look and see can the funds believe in this kind of speed of use being the kind of the driver for the floors on it as well. So we will let you know how we go, if we can talk the fund into putting the money where their mouth is on it as well. Great. I'm kind of conscious of time, that we're kind of coming to the end now. If anyone has any other comments they want to kind of make, just put your hand up or put a note in the chat and we'll bring you in. If not, we can start to kind of wrap up and let you go and get on with the rest of your day.
I think a little plug, if anyone else is interested, we run these discussions every month, as hopefully you've seen in the invitations in your inbox. The next one will be discussing the future of airports. So what these might look like. We know that they've been heavily impacted by the pandemic. As David mentioned, I think we're all aware that the pandemic will become history at some point, hopefully, all fingers crossed. And how are they going to, I guess, bounce back or evolve into whatever it might be that we need in the future, rather than just a transport interchange. So that will be the next discussion.
And as part of that, there'll be a lot of the learning that we're getting from working with obviously our duty-free operators we work with. You know, they are actually completely questioning their entire business model on the back of what's happened as well. So it's a huge kind of talking topic for our team who kind of work on that piece as well, in the way that airports are kind of going to change as well. Margot, I've just seen you've just switched your camera on. Did you want to come in and make a comment?
Yes, I mean, it's been brilliant, really interesting. What I'm also really interested, I think you covered most of the points, is really moving forward. We are in a recession, and I work in brand and innovation. I'm interested in this whole sort of the property response so far up to now has been about premium brands very luxury? How do we target? And that has become very polarized. What about the opportunity for the sort of value end? Is anyone sort of starting to really look? We talked, it's really interesting about Sheffield, how they took the market from one place to a really nice building. I don't know what the kind of the proposition mix was there, but is anyone starting from a property perspective to look at what value means for people who, you know, want great food, and what that marketplace could look like in terms of, I suppose, that is big, changing those big shopping centres from a luxury proposition to a really good, do you know what I mean, a solid value proposition, if anyone's looking at that at the moment.
I think, Margot, if anyone else has got something, please interject, but we look at, and there's a great example that we have been working on in Oslo, and more from a master planning point of view rather than specific buildings. We look at creating what we like to call a democratic landscape. So somewhere that there is there's a range of offers, but everyone feels comfortable in that space. I think personally, food halls are a great example of that, because you're all sat in the same place. But you can choose from, you might want to go and buy oysters and champagne from one vendor, or you might want to go and buy a burger from another, and you've got that mix of different I don't want to say standards, but standards of offer. But also from a landscape point of view, there's a great example on one of the master plans we're working on in Oslo, is where we look at what is the offer for the actual space rather than the retailing, to make sure that everyone feels comfortable. So we've inputted, or the local authority have inputted in a Lido. So a great example, and we use this a lot, is you can be skinny and ripped and look great in your swimming trunks and be super poor, but you could also be fat and not look great in your swimming trunks and be super rich, but everyone is in that same landscape. And it's almost like a social leveler, is when everyone takes their clothes off, they're all just humans again. And it's a great way of creating a space where everyone can be together, feel comfortable. There's lots of different offers from food to retailing, but it doesn't necessarily cater to one specific person.
And what's great is they actually, you know, this thing is built, you know, they built it, they've done it. They're in Oslo, they actually invest. And we often say they're genuine about the people who are going to live and work in the development. And that's across the whole range of kind of, you know, the social kind of this democratic landscape they look to do. So there's lots of lessons we've definitely learned from that. The other one is we've probably got 3 schemes at the moment that are looking at Lidl and Aldi in terms of a discount food offer, but with a small food market in the front of it. So the idea being that these food supermarkets not seeing it as competition from having a market outside, but actually making that specific Lidl or Aldi relevant to the local community, because that you know, a small number of local traders at the front, and yet you still go and buy your bleach and your cornflakes, you know, as David Walker said, you know, from the, you know, the supermarket, which is very efficient. But you have a little bespoke offer that's sat in the front that's delivered by the landlord or the owner of the building. And that convincing the supermarkets, and I think we're probably nearly there, that this isn't competition, this will drive footfall and actually make this one, you know, if you've got 10 Aldis, we'll choose this one because it's specific to us, or we like the mix that sits outside. And that's a way of making their stores unique as well. So that's definitely something we're seeing emerging within the market as well, in terms of that kind of value offer level as well. So yeah, it's definitely something that's kind of still, you know, out there that's being looked at as well. And Margot, I've put my email address in the chat, so if we run out of time, we can catch up separately on it, because you've only kind of just come in at the end as well.
Great, thank you.
Pleasure. No, thank you all for joining us today. I mean, these are great just for us to kind of get people together to have a conversation or interested in a topic. As Jake said, our next one is airports. It might be super interesting or not interesting to you for the next one. We're just going to kind of keep doing these. We're kind of putting a blog together to try and pull together where we're seeing trends or things emerging, you know, where different people are trying to solve the same problems again, just to kind of bring people together and kind of think differently.
It's also a great excuse to not do any work and just chat for an hour, isn't
it? That is true. That's right. I always look forward to these better. It's very nice to see like David. I've not seen David for a while, and Hamish, so that's good. Brilliant. But thank you all for joining us. That's great. If there's anything else at all, feel free to get in touch with us. Any other information about projects we've talked about, feel free to get in touch. Also, the last one we did, a few people had said, "Oh, I was really interested in person," as someone else who was in the room as well. We're very happy to act as a kind of blind date matching system. So just email Jake or myself if there's someone you want us to put you in contact, and we'll share contact details between you as well.
Super. Thank you very much, John, and thank you very much, everyone.
Brilliant. That's great for joining us. Have a good day, everyone.
Cheers. Bye.
Thanks a lot. See you, Stuart. Thanks, John. See you, Hannah. Thanks, David.